Welcome into the show. It is Daniel Wortman coming to you live from the Dreamagine Sports Studios. It is Friday, June the 21st. It is 9 a.m. on the East Coast. This is your 6 a.m. West Coast wake-up call in all time zones in between and around the world. Thanks for tuning in this Friday morning. We have wrapped up the group stages of the Women's World Cup. Some dramatic finishes yesterday, and everything is settled, and we are set up now for the knockout rounds with the U.S. taking on Spain on Monday. Last time those two teams faced, it was a 1-0 victory for the U.S. women's national team. But on that day, they struggled to break down Spain. Spain were playing with nice possession. The issue, as we were talking with Jack Gidney the other day on the show, is Spain struggles to score. They haven't really addressed some of their movement in the final third yet, and they're a country that's still developing and building. And I look for that to change, over the next 5 to 10 years in terms of getting better at execution in the final third. I would say that the U.S. is a heavy favorite to win that match, but if they struggle the way they did last time against Spain, I think it will definitely could come down to 1 or 2 goals. I do think that the U.S. women's national team will come out ahead in that matchup, but I don't think Spain's going to lie down and make it easy. So we'll see how that goes. There was some more drama yesterday as Chile had an opportunity to advance, didn't score that third goal, and therefore are on the outside looking in. And it's celebration time for Nigeria going through, and Argentina and Chile both not advancing into the knockout stages. It's going to be all she wrote for them for this tournament. But I do think we will hear from Argentina and Chile going forward. I think their programs, if they get some more support and resources and funding, I think they're going to continue to build and get even better. The fact that the Argentinian women's national team was even in this position was a testament to those women and their commitment to the game and to their country. That in spite of the support, they had found themselves battling in a World Cup and falling short, but kudos to them for their efforts. And going forward, this tournament's now going to start shaping up, and we'll see. It looks like U.S. and France are headed for a quarterfinal matchup, and all eyes will be on that match. If indeed that does happen, the U.S. winning their group yesterday in a 2-0 victory against Sweden, didn't really feel like they were in full gear, but they did enough. Sweden had some chances themselves, but didn't weren't able to do anything with it. And the one thing, I read a bunch of comments after the match from people talking about, this U.S. women's national team. They should just kind of have some patience and some composure and just kind of sit on the ball. That, they don't have to keep going forward. They don't have to keep. That's what they do. That is who they are. That is their identity. It is always forward. Possession so that we can attack, not possession so that we can keep the ball or settle the game down. It's always constant probing, and there is a good and a bad to that. The good is you've got this forward thinking mindset. The bad is it causes you to be a little impatient at times, forcing passes that you don't need to force. You're okay if it's not there, if the safe pass isn't there, and you don't need the goal. You're 2-0 up, and you are already ahead at 0-0 because of the goal difference tiebreaker. Settle down, keep the ball, cycle the ball throughout the team. Take a breather and find a way. Find a way forward. To see what you can do in possession, and so that's just not their MO. That's not who this U.S. women's national team is. It's not how they are constructed. In that aspect, we got exactly what I thought we would see yesterday, which was enough to secure a victory. Wasn't always it wasn't about being pretty or calm and composed. It's going to be who they are. The interesting piece going forward is as we saw against Spain, is Spain able to slow the tempo of the game down, and kind of sit on possession and control the pace of the game. And does the U.S. women's national team on Monday, and this is the one area where I think they could get themselves into trouble, does the U.S. women's national team get a little impatient and frustrated and start trying to force things? And in that forcing, do they open themselves up to an opportunity for either a counterattack or a mistake, or Spain able to capitalize, on a mistake kind of thing? That's kind of what, the area where I think Spain would look to exploit, and really I think it's their only chance to stay in the match, is if they can control the tempo of the match, if they can keep possession and keep the U.S. women's national team chasing the ball. With the talented players we have, there's no reason why we should have to be chasing the ball. But when you don't play in a style that is built on calm, collected, patience in possession with a purpose, and not possession so that we can immediately attack, that's when you start seeing passes out of the back and out of the midfield that are, penetrating passes, but they're high risk passes. And so we'll see how they handle that. Like I said, I think the U.S. women's national team are going to pull that game out on Monday. But if it's a repeat of what happened before a few months ago against Spain, it could be, a situation where the score line isn't very one-sided, but the U.S. may be sitting on like a 1 or 2 goal lead, very similar to what they did against Sweden, and still see the game out, but just not necessarily the prettiest soccer that we will see in this World Cup. Also in Copa America, Uruguay, Japan, a 2-2 draw. I don't know why people are surprised Japan's competitive. This Japanese men's national team and the women's national team programs have been steadily growing over the last 10 to 15 years, and for them to be competitive in Copa America is no surprise. I would say that Japan playing Uruguay 2-2 is no surprise. If the U.S. played Uruguay and it was 2-2, that would be a major surprise, because the U.S. men's national team right now is a dumpster fire. And speaking of U.S. soccer, we talked about some of the Glassdoor reviews on the show of U.S. soccer by current and former employees. And we have some journalists who have finally started reaching out and doing some research on this issue. and have been able to confirm that the sentiment, the general feeling that is captured in those Glassdoor reviews that are not they're not positive, they're not glowing reviews of Jay Berhalter, of Dan Flynn, of the culture, of the leadership within U.S. soccer. It's basically an outright revolt of the federation leadership, and basically stating, we do not want Jay Berhalter as the next CEO. Whatever you do, please don't do that. It will be terrible. That is basically the sentiment that's been summarized in these Glassdoor reviews. People have started looking into that, and they are being verified. That these accounts and this feeling, this sentiment is indeed the sentiment of the Federation staff. And if we look at that compared to the way U.S. soccer makes decisions, that likely means that Jay Berhalter's number one on the list, and it's just a matter of time before they announce him, because that's just what they do. They don't really care. They don't care about anybody except what they want to do, and they have an agenda, and it's obvious. You keep turning money and investments away from people that want to invest in the game. They don't care. They have an agenda, and if Jay Berhalter is on that agenda, then they're going to go through with that agenda. And it would be from all accounts, looking at those reviews, talking to other sources, and reading even some of the verifications from some of these reporters and media members who have actually checked in to verify this, it would be a bad hire. He does not seem to be the type of hire that is going to get us going in the right direction, that is going to inspire our staffers to rise and grow, to build for the future. And so it will be interesting to follow. And just on a personal note, I was at the U.S. Soccer AGM in Phoenix this year, 2019 AGM. And just a personal story. I was in a meeting with Jay Berhalter. Chris Kessel was in this meeting. There were other members from other state associations in this meeting. And it was basically a Q&A with Jay Berhalter. And there was a lot of questions about, why certain fees for coaching courses and licensing and et cetera were being charged, and what are we getting for this? And there was a lot of back and forth. And I asked the question to Jay Berhalter, and I said, if you have these unsanctioned leagues, and you have minorities and geographic areas that are on the outside looking in, and they're not a part of the system, what is U.S. Soccer? What is the plan from U.S. Soccer? What is your idea in order to be able to get those leagues and those players in the U.S. Soccer Federation family? How do you get them to sanction as U.S. Soccer members and as players, as leagues, as teams, etc.? And his response was, well, the badge. And I said, what do you mean the badge? He said, well, there's a lot of value in the U.S. Soccer crest. So, being able to sanction under the Federation means that you now have the ability to market with the badge, to say that you are official. And my comeback to him was, if that's what you think is going to get them to sanction. Why isn't it working now? And there was no answer. Other than we just got to do a better job of communicating that. Look, if we all know the definition of insanity. If you keep doing the same things over and over again, expecting different results, that's the definition of insanity. And to think that the badge is not attracting them now, it's not going to attract them in the future. The U.S. Soccer badge is not anything that these unsanctioned leagues care about. They don't need that now. They don't need that to do what they do now. And that is the person that many are speculating is at or near the top of the list to be the next CEO of U.S. Soccer. And his idea to solve a problem is to just keep flashing the badge. Folks, we could do better. We should do better, just like the Federation could do better and should do better. If these Glassdoor reviews are indeed true, and they seem to be, they keep getting verified that this is the sentiment within the staff of U.S. Soccer. We've got to go somewhere else and find someone that is not just qualified on paper, but has the temperament and the leadership ability to inspire and lead us forward into this next chapter of U.S. Soccer, because we all know we got a lot of issues that need to get fixed. 2026 is around the corner, and we need someone that can get us there and build this thing and not tear it all down or cause even more issues than we already have. And we've got more than enough issues to fix right now. The sponsor for this half hour of the show is Dutkick Brand. You can learn more about Dutkick Brand at DUTKIG brand.com. When you place an order, use the promo code DWSHOW to get 10% off your next order. Again, that is DWSHOW, and you will get 10% off your next order. We will be right back after this with Anthony DeChico. Welcome back into the show. Thanks for tuning in this Friday morning, June the 21st. Coming up here in just a few minutes, we will have Anthony DeChico stopping by to talk about the Women's World Cup, this U.S. women's national team, what he has seen so far, and look forward to chatting with him here in just a few minutes. As we were talking before the break, the issue that we're seeing with these Glassdoor reviews is the fact that there are a lot of staff members who basically are because Glassdoor, just for those of you who may not know what it is, Glassdoor.com is basically the ability for current or former employees to provide anonymous reviews. And in those anonymous reviews, you can actually see that there are current and former staffers that are within U.S. Soccer that are commenting about the toxic culture, and they are specifically naming Jay Berhalter and to some extent also Dan Flynn. These are the two top day-to-day operations executives of U.S. Soccer. And, as much as the board of directors gets up at an AGM and talks about, the great jobs that these guys are doing and this, that, and the other, and they offer all of these plaudits and appraise and whatever, the people that work with you every day, they're the ones who really know what's going on. And I've been hearing this for quite some time. And in hearing that, and seeing that, it has been a situation where it is no surprise that these same sentiments of the culture and the feelings that are going on have reached a level where people feel like they need to speak up, and Glassdoor has offered them the opportunity to do that. And so, we will see how things go, and see how things arise. Let's see if we have Anthony on the line. Anthony, are you here with us this morning?
I am. Good morning, Daniel.
Good morning. Thanks for coming on the show. I want to get right into the World Cup. What we've seen. We just finished the group stages yesterday. Overall, just at a kind of a 50,000-foot view before we kind of jump into some specific storylines, what have you seen so far of this World Cup, and what has your impression been?
I think it's been fantastic. The World Cup offers so many different storylines and so many different opportunities to pay attention to things that for most of the 4-year cycle get missed. And this particular World Cup is kind of the culmination of a number of different nations' storylines around women's football, all kind of being aligned to bring us what so far has been an excellent tournament, and I think it's been a lot of fun to watch. I think the goalkeeping has been great. I think the some of the goals we've seen have been great. There have been things that have been less fun. We've spent a lot of time talking about VAR and the implementation of some of the rules, but I think we're off to a great start in this World Cup.
I agree. As with every kind of new change, or rule change, or technology, there's often times a little bit of either a learning curve or transition period, etc. VAR has definitely been a break in the rhythm of the games, and some of it has even been controversial. For me, I think clear and obvious should be a standard we need to use more with VAR. If you can't see it right away, then let it go. Keep playing. It's taking too long on some of these, as in addition to what we're reviewing in the first place. So when we look at some of the specific teams. What teams have stood out to you in terms of playing beautiful soccer? What teams have impressed you in terms of the quality of their play?
The United States women's national team. I mean, we can talk about the strength of groups, but every group has stronger and weaker teams. And even with Sweden making some changes in their lineup, they were obviously very content to be in that second place slot in Group F, and playing Canada in their round of 16 match, and then taking on what most people presume will be the easier side of the bracket. So they made a lot of changes, but the U.S. In all three games has shown that they've shown up to play to their standard, not to allow anybody else to dictate the level of the game or even the tempo or style of the game. In terms of an aesthetic, I think that we all know that France is a good team that plays a pretty good brand. I think Spain plays a pretty good brand, but it has been a little bit disappointing, and people got a little bit too excited about Spain's evolution in the women's game, both because of the hype around some large crowds in Spain, also the success of the youth teams. But Todd Bean and I were sending messages. Todd Bean runs Tovo Academy out of just south of Barcelona, and he was saying that it's happening for Spain. It's coming. They're committed to implementing a style that reflects what we expect of Spanish soccer. They're just not there yet. They're just a cycle away from here. But what I do think that makes for is this U.S.-Spain matchup on Monday, could be an eye pleaser, could be a very aesthetically fun game to watch. And I thought yesterday's was too against Sweden, to be honest.
So yeah, I agree. I've been saying throughout this World Cup that if you're not watching the Spanish national team and you don't see the future, you're either not looking or you are blind. They're not there yet, but over the next 5 to 10 years, I think they are going to become a force to be reckoned with in terms of that program. Another team to me that I think has surprised people in their quality of play and their program has been Italy. What have you seen from them so far this World Cup?
Yeah, I think Italy, Italy's history over this past decade has been a little bit of what we might see from Spain, which is Italy building into the 2011 World Cup had put together a pretty strong team. And I don't know how many of your listeners will remember, but Alex Morgan scores a crucial goal in the playoff that we had to go through by losing in the semifinal to actually even qualify for that 2011 World Cup. And that really set the Italian program back, right? Because they're on the cusp of this. They've had this great run going into through that qualifying. I think they beat France and some other teams, and then they don't get the prize of getting to appear at the World Cup. And the net result is it takes them a few years to, kind of get their energy back into the game. One of the things, we haven't talked about Germany. We haven't talked about Japan, who I think are young but play a good brand. We haven't talked about one of my favorites to make a run deep into this tournament, which is Holland. I think the Dutch, and in particular, I'm an Arsenal supporter, so the Arsenal players they have, led by Medema, she is a joy to watch, and having the opportunity to see some FAWSL games this year, you really get a chance to learn these players. And this is one of the ways that this World Cup is different than any World Cup we've had in a while, is more of these players are on a stage where you get to see their tendencies. And just because we've seen Messi, 10,000 times doesn't mean we're not tuning in for 10,001, because it becomes this opportunity to catch a master at work. And it's the same thing with Medema. She's 22. She's just taken over the Dutch record with her 60th goal for the Netherlands. She won the Golden Boot in England this year and led Arsenal to their first title since 2012. And I think she's just getting started, and she's just one of a number of pieces that they've got in place.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Dutch are a team this World Cup that could easily win the whole thing if things go their way in terms of results. Obviously, everybody's got to have the results, but they've been playing really, really well. And Germany have been, finding ways to win. I haven't necessarily been completely impressed with the way they're playing, but it's that famous quote, I think, from Gary Lineker that said, two teams play and after 90 minutes the Germans win. And so I think that we've seen a little bit of that, but at each game the German national team is performing better and better. And I think if they are able to continue to grow into this tournament, they're going to be a tough out, whoever they end up getting matched up against as they go further and further into this tournament. One of the things
two teams play for 120 minutes. The game goes to penalties, and ultimately the Germans always win.
Exactly.
The Germans. What I see from the Germans is a lot of what I saw from the U.S. in 2015. The Germans have tremendous ingredients. They've got heaps of talent. Aside from the U.S., they're probably the most talented team, and smart money probably has them at least in the semifinal, but probably in the final coming out of that side. It doesn't always, it's tournaments. That's why we watch. That's why we love it. The Dutch did have that luck, that fortune in the Euros a couple of years ago, and then they had a pretty big drop off in 2017, and struggled through qualifying. And here they are, kind of coming together. And I think a run from Holland or somebody who's maybe a little bit less known outside of their confederation would be great for the tournament. I think Japan's ascendancy in 2011, 2015 was fantastic for Asian football and for soccer in general. So, again, being a little bit biased, I'd like to see the Dutch make a good run. But we're at one of the best points in the entire tournament here because we've played 36 games. We have a pretty good sense of these players, of what they're about, of what these teams' identities are. But only 8 teams have been eliminated, and most of this was essentially just seeding to kind of put this bracket in front of us. And the matchups are great, and we're going to have a really, really fascinating couple weeks here to determine a world champion.
Completely agree. On a macro level, the Matildas and others have been talking about the purse for this World Cup and trying to get FIFA to up the prize money to treat the Women's World Cup in the same way, or at least in a better way than they've been treating it in comparison to the Men's World Cup that took place last year in Russia. What are your thoughts on that, and where do you see that going? It may not necessarily be something dramatic this World Cup cycle, but how do you see that playing forward, say, going into 2023?
I spend more of my energy at this point on U.S. soccer than I do on FIFA. There's a whole number of variables that are feeding into this. The first thing we have to talk about is not just that the players are calling for and deserve, quite frankly, equal prize money, but the fact that the gap, and I don't have the percentages in front of me, but the gap between the men and women has actually increased. So what they'll do is they'll say, look, we're going to double the women's prize money. And then they'll add a significant chunk to the men's, but the percentage disparity actually grows in that process. So it becomes this whole game of spin. Most of this comes back to leadership. And I'm a big believer, and as we talk about our federation, I'll say the same thing. We have to look at things not as black and white, but in the context of what's a very complicated, landscape. And so let's also praise FIFA, because today Gianni Infantino sent a letter to the Iranian Federation calling for women to be allowed into the stadiums in Iran for the World Cup qualifiers going into 2022. This is a major step, and something that a whole lot of people all over the world have been fighting for a very long time. If you're on Twitter and you want to learn more about it, at Open Stadiums is the primary handle for that movement. But there's equality of respect, and then there's the equality of the financial returns. You know, all of the players understand that it's going to take, you know, years, decades for the women's game to get fully developed to the point where financially it's in a comparable place to the men's game. What's going to get us there, though, is the leadership that we've seen from. I'll go back to the Dutch here. The Dutch have put in a plan to create equitable pay for their women by 2023 that the women seem supportive and on board with. But ultimately, what has to happen is leaders, the people who actually get to make these decisions, have to decide that there may be reasons not to, but those reasons are no longer valid or don't supersede the impetus to do what's right. And to do what's right is to stop marginalizing the event. One of the things I've been trying to be deliberate about, unless I'm specifically referencing events that or contexts where we're talking about the Men's World Cup and the Women's World Cup, I don't refer to the World Cup as the Women's World Cup this year, and I have for every event previous to that. But all we're doing is creating a label to somehow make it okay to be less all in or to be less committed to this event than we were last year. So if FIFA want to get to the point of equality, it's going to come through all of these little things, labeling the Men's World Cup the Men's World Cup and the Women's World Cup the Women's World Cup, or just assuming that your audience is savvy enough to know that last year was the World Cup and this year is the World Cup. And I think that's the way we're headed. Unfortunately, things tend to be pretty slow coming out of Zurich. So it's going to take some of the federations and confederations demonstrating, modeling what it looks like, and being celebrated for it. Because, you know, we don't have enough time. There's not enough hours in the day to talk about the areas of concern as it relates to women's football with FIFA. But the fact that just this month we have an FA president, the president of the Afghanistan Federation, getting a lifetime ban for assaulting and kidnapping essentially players from his national team program. You know, this is 2019. I mean, we have to get ourselves to a point where our expectations and what we're willing to acquiesce to is much, much higher than where we are today. I mean, I was just reading Twitter before I jumped on with you, and there's people standing in bus lines and taxi queues after the U.S.-Sweden game last night with no taxis coming. That's on the local organizing committee. And, you know, I wasn't in Russia, but I was in Brazil a couple years before that. And yeah, there's always logistical issues around a World Cup, but the French have hosted European Championships and the World Cup in the past and have not had those issues. So what is it? Are you not putting enough resources into the planning? Is there justifiable explanations for why things are at a lower standard? You know, one of the stadiums sold out of food before the game kicked off. You know, FIFA's had major issues with merchandising and long lines at merch tents. So we talk about equality, and, you know, inevitably we get some guy who loves Barstool Sports to tell us that, well, they're not generating the same revenue. But if you're not, as FIFA or U.S. Soccer or CONCACAF or whoever, if you're not investing the same resources and creating the same level playing fields, then that immediately, marginalizes that argument. And so what I'm constantly looking for is who are the leaders, who's going to carry us into the future.
Speaking of leaders and carrying us into the future, let's talk about U.S. soccer for a minute. And I opened this show talking about the Glassdoor reviews, and have talked about this for a couple of days on the show in bits and pieces. And now there have been some media members who have actually gone and started reaching out to sources to try to confirm or prove wrong that these Glassdoor reviews, are either, the sentiment of a few, or is it really a widespread toxic culture as described in some of these U.S. soccer Glassdoor reviews? And they have been able to confirm this toxicity in the culture, and definitely is a sentiment about frustration with the executive levels of leadership within U.S. soccer. In order for us to really kind of fix things here at home, when you talk about setting an example for FIFA and other FIFA members, and in operating in a way that is excellent and is propelling us towards greatness and excellence going forward, what are your observations of U.S. soccer and in the culture and leadership aspects of this federation?
Well, first of all, I want to say what I tweeted last night, which is that I'm ridiculously annoyed that this is what we have to talk about the day after the U.S. won their group and 3 days before they play the round of 16 match. The pattern that has emerged from U.S. soccer over decades. This is not a new thing, but the pattern that has emerged has always been one that the ends justify the means. That if we get what we want, that it will take us to where we need to go. So what that has done is created power dynamics, which not only hurt us because we have this aggregation, the centralization of power in Chicago, but also because it has created these I was going to say fractures, but they're more like canyons within the landscape of our soccer community. And the Fed is fighting wars on more fronts than it can possibly handle. And the real problem is that they're fighting wars with the people, with their own constituents, with members, with supporters of U.S. soccer. One of the caveats I'll throw in here for your listeners who don't follow me or who haven't heard me before is that I don't love the organization, but I love U.S. soccer. I love the women's national team program. I love the men's national team program. I love, watching our youth national teams. And there's really, and I love our Paralympic team, and I love our deaf women's national team, and the futsal team and the beach team, and Landon and Jermaine are taking, and a good friend of mine, Craig Childs, are taking a U.S. arena soccer team to an event. I think it's just happened or is just happening. But U.S. soccer, American soccer in every form should be celebrated, and that's not where we are. And the issue I have is not just with the Fed; it's with these, the protest movement as well, the opposition movement as well, because I see a ton of cynicism. I see a ton of people who don't believe that because we're not where we want to be today, that we can't get there. And I immediately reject that notion because I look at exactly where we are. And women's soccer is the perfect example. Is, going back 24 years, matches were on an accessory channel. ESPN2 had just launched was an accessory channel. Games were tape delayed. They didn't show every game. And ESPN did a good job with the professionalism and the presentation. But here we are 20 years later, and there's no question that the Women's World Cup is a global event. And yeah, there's things that I want Fox to do better. And yeah, there's things that I want U.S. Soccer to do better. But also, my belief has always been one that there is a manifest destiny to the growth of the game in this country. There is a generation of kids who grew up not only playing, because that's been happening now for a few generations, but playing and growing up with FIFA, the video game, and with the World Cup being broadcast, to their whatever device or TV or satellite dish or bar that you want. The access to the game, the growth of the game, the popularity of the game will only continue to increase. And as that happens, the amount of pressure that exists on the federation will increase as well, and they will be able to get away with less. But also, this current leadership crop will continue to try to get away with whatever they think they can in the context of trying to achieve what they view as, necessary objectives or ideal outcomes. But already, I mean, in the couple of years since the U.S. failed to qualify for Trinidad, we're already seeing changes. And where we are today was a necessary condition of a reform process that I don't think enough reformers have trained for enough patience for what we're actually talking about. Going back prior to the presidential election, I said that this reform process is an 8 to 12 year process. The Japanese, by the way, when they did their most recent strategic plan, put out a 100-year plan. And I thought that was brilliant, not because their plan right now is going to reflect anything what it looks like 100 years from now, but what it's demonstrating is that the people who wrote that plan know that it's not about them, that it's not about their ego or their fulfillment or what they want or even getting to see the project come to fruition. And I know what that looks like because I feel very fortunate that prior to his death, my father was able to see the U.S. celebrate winning the World Cup again, which after 16 years and the near misses and everything, wasn't a guarantee. And certainly the way we played in 2015 in the group stage in the round of 16 was nowhere near at the standard or as good as the team has been this year. But that's what all this comes down to. And, I think that because I know how much of yourself you put into the movement, into the evolution, but people have to gear up for a much longer haul than I think they would want or they were hoping for. But it's going to take that time for us to create the conditions for not only the organization in Chicago to represent what we want it to, but also for soccer in America to evolve and for more Chris Kessels to emerge and more Sky Eddie Bruces to come out of the woodwork and help us to see the places where we're missing things.
Completely. Two thoughts came to mind as you were talking. The first,
Sure.
the first is when I look at where we are and where we could be, and I think back to the famous speech of JFK when he was speaking in front of the country, but also in front of the world, when he said we're going to put a man on the moon by the end of this decade, and that kind of vision and leadership. Germany had that moment. Ralph Honigstein in his book Das Reboot detailed those conversations and that process after having a miserable time in the Euros in 2000 and in the early 2000s, late 90s, realizing that they had to rethink how they did German soccer. And then, 10 years later, 10 years later, they're winning the World Cup in Brazil. after the implementation of that whole process. That's one thing about visionary leadership, bold leadership. Obviously, you're not where you want to be, but this is where we're going. Kind of in line with what you're talking about the 100-year plan of Japan, and you see, Germany again looking at some shortcomings in the fact that their current system hasn't been producing, 1v1 specialists. And so they're kind of going, okay, what can we do at a youth level to produce players who can do that and not always look to have to import those players from outside of Germany. The second thought that I had while you were going through that is something that Gary Vaynerchuk, and I don't know how familiar you are with Gary Vaynerchuk. He's a business guy and has a daily podcast and written a bunch of books. And one of the things he says a lot that I really like is micro hustle, macro patience. And meaning every day you're putting in your work and you are grinding and doing the unglamorous part of whatever it is you're doing to build your dreams, and then having on a macro level the patience to go, we're going to get this right, we're going to keep building, and eventually we'll get there, but we have to work today, otherwise tomorrow never happens. And that's really my view on this, is that we didn't get here overnight, and we didn't get to a place where we are from a federation level in terms of specific organization or as a culture in the country at large. And we're not going to get out of this overnight, but we do need vision, and we do need a commitment to that vision. But we also have to have a commitment to that vision. That means that every day, each of us are working wherever we are, whatever level we're at, to do our part as individuals to help build us and get us to that future. And I think that is an element to this where, as frustrating as it is at times to see some of the decisions and the choices that this federation has been making, I feel like if more of us would take that viewpoint of micro hustle, macro patience, and do things like what Chris has done, what Sky Eddie Bruce has done, what others have done, and the thing Anthony, have been really encouraged about over the last 18 months since the election is that more and more people that you would classify as quote unquote insiders, people that are working at a state association level or within, U.S. soccer member association levels, are starting to get vocal about their displeasure in certain things, where in the past they wouldn't even speak up. Maybe not because they disagree, but maybe fear of retribution or whatever. But more people are now actually saying, "Hey, this specific thing isn't right, or this isn't good. We need to do better at this," or whatever. And ultimately, that's how we get to change, is that more and more of those people say enough is enough. Let's do something better. Let's put a man on the moon, or in the case of the way I view it, instead of saying let's make soccer the preeminent sport in America, I would rather say we want to be the greatest soccer country on earth. How do we get there? What do we have to do? And that means for everybody. That's the men's, that's the women's, that's our youth, that's our deaf, that's our, let's be the best at everything. The same view that we have when we go to the Olympics is the same view that we should have about our soccer in this country in terms of where it stands up in the global picture. And I don't care about, the culture of the past and the history and the tradition in Brazil and Spain or whatever. We have enough resources. We are the greatest sports economy on earth. We have everything at our fingertips. And we, instead of using excuses, I would rather us get bold and dream, put 100-year plan out there and start building that thing and going there. And I think if we'll take that viewpoint of micro hustle, macro patience, I think we can start to take even more steps to lead us in that direction. So
let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because it really comes back to what you were talking about with putting a man on the moon, that is a tangible objective, right? Winning the World Cup is a tangible objective. Now, there's a million variables. You can try and control as many of them as you possibly can. But at the end of the day, people are going to have to execute and things are going to happen in order for that objective to be accomplished, right? For that box to be checked. So I can only control a very, 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 very tiny portion of that puzzle, right? I'm one piece of that puzzle. But what I think that there is a growing understanding of, and you see it in the work of Tom Byer with Soccer Starts at Home, and I see it when I was just reading a Mia quote yesterday about youth development, and I see it when I travel around the country and talk to parents and players. The unifying theme that we have not latched onto is joy, is fun, right? The idea that whoever the leader is going to come into U.S. soccer and snap their fingers and everything is going to be righted is not how this proceeds. How it does proceed is we help everybody, all of your listeners, right? Today is our first rest day in the last two weeks of the World Cup. And so what is your soccer mindset today? And mine is just tremendous gratitude that we're in the middle of this awesome sporting event, that we've got some fantastic players that we've just seen play and that we get to look forward to seeing play over the next couple of weeks. We've got some incredible storylines, even for teams that didn't advance. Jamaica, the first Caribbean team ever to go to the World Cup. We've got Argentina, who I think, was it last week that you had Nicole Rodriguez on? Or 2 weeks ago?
Absolutely. Last Friday.
So last Friday. So this Argentinian team was instrumental in supporting the Puerto Rican team, who Puerto Rico are right now light years away from the World Cup. But the Argentinians and the Puerto Ricans were able to create this shared empathy and understanding of what the situation that these programs face around the world. And we've seen this too with the international movement around the Afghanistan team. And you, at some point when you're talking to these players and you're finding out everything that they've been through, and one book, a lot of good books about women's soccer right now. One that's a little bit older, but is a great book on this topic. Gwen Oxham, into Out of the Darkness and Into the Light, I think it's called. You can Google it. But it's one of the first really good books, and you were talking about this with people in state associations and elsewhere. One of the first really good books at pulling the curtain back on the issues that face women's soccer. And you and I could create a huge laundry list. But in spite of all that, in spite of the fact that I engage in this space too, the prevailing thing that I feel around the game right now is joy. And it's even joy in players discovering failure, because Kristen Press was talking about it in her press conference 2 days ago before the Sweden game. And you'll hear every elite athlete you ever hear talk about their journey, we'll talk about it, is the failure is the fertilizer. Failure creates the conditions for the soil to yield what it potentially can yield. And in 2018, watching a World Cup, the first that I can remember, because the '90 World Cup was really my first World Cup. So the first that I can remember in my life where the U.S. isn't there and still finding joy in that event, in that game, in those games. That's something that we can do on a daily basis as coaches, as administrators, as business people, as all of it. And I, more than anything else right now, Chicago is not a fun place. Soccer House is not a fun place to be. U.S. soccer is not in a fun place. They have moved themselves so far away from the authentic spirit of the game, the true joy of the game, that it will. That's why our next CEO has to come from outside of U.S. soccer, because there's no potential scenario. I shouldn't be that definitive. There might be a few threads that can be weaved, but the idea of being able to create the distance from what has just transpired over the Dan Flynn era for the last 19 years, and then immediately reinvent the Fed, having come from that era. There's 0.1% chance that Jay Berhalter can thread that needle. He just doesn't have the capacity because he is part of that regime, right? It'd be as if Dick Cheney became president after George W. Bush. The country had no appetite for that. There was no scenario in which that would have been the best thing for the country. Not after two wars and all of the other things. Well, it's the same scenario here. Jay has been referred to as Dan's right hand and the de facto CEO and all these things and other things that you read in the Glassdoor review. What it is his fingerprints are all over this. And it's time for us to find a leader who doesn't feel the need to aggregate power, but who is empowered by people all over the country engaging the game at that base level where they love it, they have fun doing it, they enjoy it, and that passion and that joy becomes infectious. And for me this spring, it was going back to coach. I coached a freshman boys high school team, right? Results couldn't matter less. The opportunity to work with them every day and that consistency was fantastic. But at the end of the day, we had fun. There's no championships to win. The boys got better developmentally, and we came out every day, and I had fun, and they had fun, and it was a positive experience. So if we can do more of that, if we can spread that gospel, then I think the real path forward is, in essence, marginalizing the impact of U.S. soccer. There's things that they're always going to have influence and control over, but they don't control the game. They don't control the game. We control the game, and I think too many people, Gary Vee is big on not being a victim of your circumstances, right? Dictating your circumstances. And I think too many of us have gotten caught up in that cynical vortex where we feel, and I've been here too, I'm not here now, but I've been here, where we feel helpless based on decisions that are coming out of Chicago. And that's not a fun place to be.
I agree, and like I said before, I mean, for me, this whole thing is when I'm referring to this whole thing. Speaking of positive change, building for the future, visionary leadership, positive steps, etc. It is about all of us. It's not one thing or one person. You could bring in a new president of U.S. Soccer in 2018, and they weren't going to be able to wave a magic wand and change everything overnight.
Right.
There's still going to be a lot of work, and working with Eric Winalda during that campaign, that was a private conversation that we were having constantly. Is if you were able to win, do you understand what comes next? If you think the election's hard, I mean, there's a lot that's going to come after that. So for sure. Hey, look, before we run, I'm going to put you on the spot, and I want you to. I'm gonna get you to pick who you think is going to win these 8 knockout round games that start tomorrow, we don't have to go beyond these 8 matchups, but I thought it'd be fun before you headed off. We can leave with a little bit of joy with this conversation for the weekend.
We'll leave this before we can talk about those individual games. Before the tournament, I thought the U.S. was the best team in the world, and I didn't see any reason why it's not believable, conceivable, and a great opportunity for them to win this tournament. There's nothing I saw in the group stage that changes my mind. And I'm not afraid to say that the U.S. is the best team in the world and that it's the U.S.'s tournament to lose. And the reason I say that is because that is the energy that they have demonstrated from the outset of this tournament. So we can work backwards from there, but I expect that at the end of this tournament, odds are that we will be putting a fourth star on the crest. That's what I believe.
So having said that, we already know that the U.S.-Spanish match, you're picking the U.S. to win. On the other side of that quarterfinal bracket, you have France and Brazil. Who do you think comes out of that match?
I think France comes out of that one. I think that Brazil, both those matchups with the U.S. I find compelling. It becomes kind of the bookend of the Marta era, with the U.S. going to face Brazil in the final in 2004, which was, Mia and Julie and Joy Fawcett send off. So to get one more shot at this epic, U.S. Brazil era with Marta leading Brazil would be fun. But I don't think Brazil is all the way there. I think the French are more complete. Having said that, that one, Brazil is cultured and has won enough of these games at this point to know how to do it. And they have players who are capable of moments of brilliance. But when you're having trouble because your 41-year-old central midfielder is on yellow card suspension, that tells me that there's major issues with your depth. So what I said yesterday is even if Brazil finds a way past France, I think they come out a wounded animal and the U.S. just runs riot over them. But I do think France wins that game. And then I think France follows a pattern that every country, with the exception of the United States in 1999 and 2003, has fallen victim to, which is every other host of the Women's World Cup has been ousted at the quarterfinal stage. So that's Germany, Sweden, China has had that happen twice to them. Canada did it in 2015. And the reason, and to be perfectly candid with you here, take it back to my father's team, it almost happened to us too in 1999. That was the game that was the hardest game in the entire tournament, and still one of the greatest women's soccer games ever to be played. They come back 1-1, then they go down 2-1 just before half, and then Brandy scores the equalizer, and Joy Fawcett scores the winner, and it's 3-2 to the U.S. But that moment, in the locker room, Dad's halftime talk to the team was, do you want your dream to die now? The U.S. team had the culture and the leadership behind Carla Overbeck and Julie Foudy and the layers of leadership to deal with it, but people don't understand how much pressure is on the host. You're the engine of the tournament, and by the way, you're also trying to do this other thing where you win the tournament. And in France's case, having not taken the other steps yet, where they get to a major final, let alone win one, I think it's probably a bridge too far. And I think they're very unfortunate in their draw to end up facing the U.S. in the quarterfinals. But I think the U.S. wins that probably 2-1 or 3-2, something like that.
So picking up with another quarterfinal bracket, you have Norway and Australia. Who do you see coming out of that matchup?
The two toughest of these round of 16 games. My gut tells me Norway, because I think that they've been playing some decent soccer, and also because when in doubt, I tend to lean more towards the program that has demonstrated that they know how to, even if they haven't done it most recently. Having said that, Sam Kerr is, if not the best striker in the world, one of the top 3 strikers in the world, and Australia have a good team spirit about them. There was a lot of issues around the removal of their coach earlier in the year, but they built into the tournament. And even after that first loss that they took, they continued to improve, and I think that one could go either way, but I probably lean a little bit towards Norway.
England, Cameroon.
England. It's great that Cameroon has now advanced to their second straight knockout round. But I think this England team is there late into the tournament. They showed me something in this in their last group game, and if Phil Smart, he's going to tap back into that, which was he gives Rachel Daly her first World Cup start. He pushes the restraining line a little bit. They apply a little bit more pressure, and then they found their killer instinct some, and they didn't score every opportunity that they had against Japan, but I thought they ran that game, and I was really impressed by them.
Italy and China.
So I'm going to go against what I just said here and say Italy because I think their form is better. But that's an interesting matchup. Interestingly, if those two games go the other way, we get a Japan-China quarterfinal, which from a tournament perspective would have massive global implications because of the huge populations in that portion of the world. And two teams that have both been to finals, been at that caliber. But I'm going to lean. My last name's DeChico. I'm going to lean towards Italy on that one.
I like it. Netherlands, Japan.
I've taken the Dutch. I believe in the Dutch. The Japanese. We look at these teams and everybody has a different agenda. I think that this Japanese team is being set up to compete for a gold medal in Tokyo next year. That's what I think that they want, because I don't see any other reason why you don't bring Yuki and you make some of the decisions that they've made. They're a very young team. The Japanese have a style and have a system that works, that's won them a World Cup in the past, but this isn't that team. It's not even the team that we saw in the final in 2015. I think, the U.S. had a little bit of turnover, but the Japanese basically have an entire new team with us at this point. I shouldn't say that. There's a couple players who are in their second and third World Cups, but definitely a side that skews younger. So I'm going with the Dutch on that one.
Germany and Nigeria.
Germany. Nigeria, squeaks into the knockout stage. The Germans, interestingly, because of what you brought up earlier, they haven't been world beaters at this point, right? So they've become a little bit of the new dark horse. And if I was a betting man, you learn not to bet against the Germans. I mean, I remember the 2003 final back when the stadium in Carson was called the Home Depot Center, and the Germans were in a ridiculous battle with Sweden. But like you were saying, the Gary Lineker, the Germans find a way to win. That's part of their DNA. And so I think Germany makes a deep run.
And the final knockout stage match that is on the schedule coming up now is Sweden and Canada. How do you see that one shaping up?
I'll back CONCACAF. I hope Canada wins it. I want Canada to win it. I think that Sweden, because they knew that they were getting the matchup they wanted, they were able to rest their players in that third group game. They basically got to treat the third group game, and the U.S. did too, like they had already won the group. So I think that after coming off of Canada's loss and with Sweden coming off of the rest that they have, it's probably a little bit of an edge to Sweden. But Jessie Fleming is one of my favorite players to watch in this entire tournament for Canada. Jadine Becky is a hell of a player. Sink is an X factor that you can never deny. She's that lethal and that potent, and to be doing it at the level that she is right now after so many years, we'll see. But I hope I want the CONCACAF teams to do well. I think this tournament will be better if in 2023 they go to 32 teams, simply because the stakes in the group stage go up that much higher, right? Instead of eliminating 8 teams, you eliminate 16 teams. And I want to see Mexico at the World Cup, and I want to see Mexico doing well, and I want to see Jamaica come back, and I want to see Trinidad and Tobago find the form that they had under Randy Waldrum. and compete with the top teams in our region. So, I'll back Canada on that one, but like the other one we talked about, that one a bit more of a coin flip. So we'll see.
Well, Anthony, thanks for spending some time with us today, talking women's soccer, U.S. Soccer Federation, the way forward, the way towards reform, leadership. We've covered a whole host of topics and gone in depth and in and around this World Cup. Thanks for spending some time with us this Friday on your one World Cup off day so far since this tournament kicked off. And
don't think we didn't schedule that deliberately. Hey, I appreciate you having me, and always lots to talk about, but appreciate the work and the light that you're shining on some of the issues that maybe have gone under the radar in the past. So to all the listeners, please enjoy the rest of the tournament. Tell your friends and family to tune in, watch games that aren't the U.S. games. Those things have real dollars and cents implications when we talk about equality and we talk about pay. But mostly just keep enjoying the game. We do this for a reason. We all love it. So,
absolutely.
Best to you, sir.
Thank you, and thank you for coming on. That was.
Okay, take care.
That is Anthony DeChico, and spending some time with us, and we went well beyond our normal time allotment that we normally do on this show, but felt like it was definitely worth it. We had a lot to talk about and a lot to cover, and so we did. We just went a little extra time today on this Friday, June the 21st. Thanks for tuning in this Friday. Our sponsor this half hour. In this extra time is Charity Water, and you can learn more about Charity Water by going to charitywater.org. They provide clean drinking water to people all over the world, and you can be a part of that by going to charitywater.org. We'll be right back after this.
No one, no man, no woman, no child should ever have to drink green water with bugs, with algae, with disease in it. Bad water and a lack of toilets kills more people than all the wars in the world. We know how to bring clean drinking water right now to every single person on earth. And when you can bring water into communities, it truly transforms them. It changes everything. Or you could know that you'd made a difference. You could know that you had truly impacted the life of a family, of a community, of a region. There was either clean water or there wasn't. We believe in a world where every single person has clean and safe water to drink. We will continue fighting until that happens.
Welcome back into the show. It is Friday, June the 21st. I'd like to thank Anthony DeChico for coming on today, and I'd like to thank all of our guests for coming on this week and spending time with us. AJ Adcock on Monday. Tuesday, we had Ken Benzinger, author of Red Card, on Tuesday. Wednesday, Jack Gidney. Yesterday, Dawn Crow, and today, Anthony DeChico. Thanks to all of our guests for coming on to the show, talking soccer, and spending some time with us. As always, you can watch weekdays live at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on DanielWorkman.com, and you can listen to the podcast each and every day as well. So thanks for tuning in. We'll see everybody again on Monday.